Focus is essential.
You are now listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with your host, George Valenzuela.
This is education coach George Valenzuela. Welcome to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast, where I provide all educators, whether instructional leaders or teachers, tips on how to be their best both personally and professionally. Now let's get into it. We are here today with my very good friend, Coach Victor Hicks. Victor is an entrepreneur, a teacher, and the founder of Coding with Culture. How are you?
I'm good today, George. I cannot complain, having a marvelous Monday. And yourself?
I'm super excited. We've been waiting on this one for 2-3 years now, I think.
No, I waited with patience.
Wait. I love that you excel in 3 major areas of your life. Number 1, you're a kick-ass entrepreneur like myself.
Thank you.
Number 2, you're very passionate about STEM and computer science, also like myself. And number 3, you're passionate about HBCUs. Victor and I met on Twitter in 2020. He got into my DMs, y'all. He got into my DMs.
Actually, I think it was the other way around, sir. We have to check the facts on that one.
I've got the receipts. I actually went back and looked, and Victor requested information from me.
That's right.
About using PBL to teach computer science. The rest is history. We've been friends ever since. Victor, tell the people from your perspective, how has our personal relationship evolved since then?
We've become, I would say, probably a step above friends, more like brothers. George's wife and I jokingly joke about leaving him behind when we go hang out. You definitely hit the nail on the head. That was a good memory because if it was around PBL and teaching the K-5, actually as Coding with Culture was coming into fruition. So I think the great part about our personal relationship growing in the way that it did is that it was an integral part of not only just taking the step out of the classroom and looking more at the independent education or entrepreneurial route, but also in just building my rapport as a teacher. Can't shake a stick at the wonderful personal benefits of it, but it definitely has been a big boost to my professional growth as well.
For anyone tuning in, this is called the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. It's a podcast where we interview not just educators, but friends of mine that are excelling in 3 major areas of their life. Can you tell us what made you start the company and become an entrepreneur?
Interestingly enough, right after the pandemic, too long after I reached out to you, I was looking for some ways to amp my game up a little bit in computer science. I was doing kind of the typical route. I'd stepped a little bit into kind of the, I guess we would say, like the predecessors of PBLs. We were moving away from just the standard lessons. Fortunately, once we started creating, I started taking the passion, I think, why it's important. Another reason why it's important for teachers to teach their passion, saw how the addition of PBL to computer science really translated in that virtual space. And as cliche as it sounds, a lot of my kids who weren't even able to engage in the ways that they were in the classroom, really saw them developing some of those life skills, or maybe not those things that we can measure by data. As you and I know, what the companies are preparing them for in the 21st century. So 2021, I had parents that were like, "Hey, Coach Hicks, we were willing to pay you. Would you mind getting on a couple hours a day with the kids?" And so we actually developed a camp called Coding with Culture. So it was a frat brother of mine, never with the intention of it being any more than just getting the kids on. So he did hands-on STEM in the morning, and I did the kids signed on with me for computer science. Parents talked, and then I think it was a Jack and Jill chapter that was like, "Hey, we heard great things. Would you consider doing it? Workshop for us," and then the Girl Scout troops. It just kind of went from there. It literally has been building the plane while I've been flying it, because my thing always was wanting to focus on the actual teaching and learning. That's always been my passion, or my lifeblood, what keeps me going. So it's always been a way of making sure I was keeping that balance. I never wanted to step fully into the role of business owner to the point where I wasn't able to work with kids and impact children in a positive way, but also I really couldn't ignore the fact that the impact by growing it outside of my classroom, how I could really take my passion and love for equity in computer science and STEM and the HBCUs and get it out to more people. So it's been a labor of love. I think it is the personification of building the plane while flying it. So I'm like, I should be doing this. Okay, go ahead and take care of that. But again, I love it because I think it's nothing more authentic to be going through that process with my children. And one of the things that speaking of working with the kids, I'm very passionate about students, or especially students of color, learning about entrepreneurship and how they could take those skills in the 21st century, things they're taking from the K-12 experience. And so for them to be able to see that very vulnerable piece of Coach Hicks being that lifelong learner along with them, developing my business. So what we did the HBCU Shark Tank. That was the time I buckled down, made myself write my business plan for Coding with Cultures. I was right there with them. And that's been the most, I think, beneficial part. Then they're able to learn and see. It's not, as you well know, it's some scary days sometimes.
I've got two major takeaways there. The first one is for aspiring entrepreneurs. Victor mentioned building the plane while he's flying it. And that's the thing I tell people all the time. Don't look at me. Don't look at Victor. Don't look at other people that have their business organized. All you need is passion to start. And when you start with passion, with love, it's a labor of love, as he said, then you will meet the right people and the right opportunities and the resources will be presented for you to carry out your purpose.
Absolutely.
But number two, I have a confession. Have you noticed that recently I've been doing a lot of work with kids?
Yes. Yeah.
You inspired that.
See, now you can tell me I've had to get emotional here, George. Now listen,
I want you to know that.
That means a lot. I'm glad that, again, going back to that labor of love, it's definitely part of you that wears you out. Is coming in that day to day and really figuring out even that balance of how much teacher, how much entrepreneur. That was actually, and go back to your earlier question about starting Coding with Culture. Once I started applying for other jobs, like just the day-to-day teaching, because I was bound by so many things that I wasn't interested in being a test proctor. I love the art of teaching. And I realized that once I started even considering careers outside of the classroom, I said, okay, I have to go back to ground one, because I know that right now the grass looks greener in a lot of these. We had the great teacher migration, but knowing me, being very frank, it was hard. It was definitely a time where I was like, and knowing the situations that went on during that time, it was very easy to walk away from education. But what I realized is as I was going through that process, nothing quite clicked. And I think you hit the nail on the head also by the phrase, what is this for you? So if I was supposed to go work for Google Consulting or write curriculum for company X, Y, and Z, but I think God knew. He's like, no, we need you to stay in front of these kids, and there's still some impact, but also challenging yourself to making me uncomfortable enough where I had to go back and say, okay, I can't go this traditional path because I'm not the traditional teacher. I think there's magic in that. And I like the freedom to be able to go speak to teachers, but also know after those couple of days, you have kids that are waiting on me to come back and work with them.
When I began coaching teachers around the country back in 2014, I quickly realized that the teachers don't like to receive PD from the person that doesn't work with kids anymore.
Right.
That's the main reason why I kept my job at the university. But it's still not the same thing as working with kids. One of the things they realized as I started to learn more about pedagogy and more about teaching practices is that I wasn't back then in the classroom a teacher I am now. And that was a regret of mine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know how it will happen. I did not know, but opportunities presented themselves in 2023, one in Sacramento, one in Maryland, and another one in Illinois, where I'm working with students. One of the things that I've learned is not be nervous, because I've done it so many times. Every week I'm somewhere and I know everything is going to be worked out. When I got in front of the kids again from disadvantaged populations, I realized why I had to become what I needed to become in order to be in front of these kids again. And I love that you work with kids as part of your business. Like I said, you've influenced me to do the same. Can you explain that model and what other edupreneurs could learn from this practice in tandem with speaking to adults?
I think it's, again, building the plane while you're flying it. I realized I was reaching and grabbing, doing some really great opportunities, but I felt like I was lacking purpose. I really held myself my own feet to the fire again to say, okay, if there's three things that I do, what are the three impact areas that you would want Coding with Culture to carry out their mission statement? And two out of the three were school partnerships. The other being what we call pillars of engagement. One is named at HBCU Yard. That is where it's physically me in front of my virtual students, whether they be here local in Atlanta. We have fortunate to have clients that have come from pretty much all over the country. I wanted to make sure to be intentional about that, because as I kept building that business model, that allowed me to go back to that piece and not get too caught up in being here and there where I could not fulfill that piece. And then also the school partnership, I had to be very honest. There was a point, where the speaking thing was even kind of taken over as number one. Even as I designed our pillars and put them in ranking order, I was, again, very intentional about making sure, how do we impact the most kids? So again, part of that, I think, is absolutely speaking to the teachers, right? Because you teach a man to fish, he can eat. Don't know the exact quote, but it's only so much. I think those of us that are passionate about what we do, as you well know, we have a tendency to try to do too many things. And it was my mom, who's a veteran educator of 30 plus years. She said, well, right now, if you were to get sick, what would happen? One of the catch-22s of that is that when you are so passionate and you do put yourself into that role, so much also rides on you, and life happens. And how do you really look at expanding it? Or on a good note, getting the message out to as many as possible. So I think the teaching part, working with the kids, I worked hand in that. I look at it more as like those school partnerships, working with my week-to-week clients being our foundation. And then the blossoms would be us going out and sharing that work with teachers. Because you are absolutely right. I think now we are PD'd out to the point where people start to vet. And one of the quickest, the first filters is you got to have that street cred. So the further you are out that classroom, and it's like folks are sizing you up. Like, how long? Okay. And as we know, our friend Twitter is not always the nicest place. So, a lot of those conversations. I also remember that I never wanted to be, you and I also talked about that a lot, where we get to the point where you outgrow your experiences so much that you forget about those PDs that we hated to sit in. Mm-hmm. I love the phrase, be the teacher that you needed when you were younger. But I think we talk about PD, like, if you really are serious about getting that message across, if there's really a teacher, or you really want to do the thing, not just to spread out, just mass, get out to as much quality over quantity. I feel like you have to remember those things. You have to check yourself on that. It's been things that I've come to, especially with the DEIs. We have this Black teacher that's talking about HBCUs, so we're going to have him come speak to us about teaching Spanish. And I'm like, nope, we're not, because just because we have the HBCU check mark, I'm very intentional about our work. And again, and making sure that we stay grounded and humble enough where we're able to say, look, last week, so, yes, my presentations are full of stories about my current kids. But I think, like I said, in all fairness, teachers deserve that. And then I also think, in turn, their kids that are impacted by what their teachers learn are more likely to be impacted in greater ways. I love teaching, so it was totally 100% real for me. But if getting away from kids was your thing, then it's like, don't. Because listen, I'm gonna tell you, if you don't love it, I tell young teachers all the time, I say, baby, look, if you don't have to love it, but if you don't,
this is not for you,
baby. This is not McDonald's. Do not
well,
let
Coach,
fool you.
Coach, because of you, I will continue working with kids. In fact, I've incorporated that into my coaching contracts. Oh. I'm realizing that a lot of young people are hurting in many ways. Mm-hmm. CDC data says that they're struggling at home. They are struggling after the pandemic. A lot of them don't want to be at school. But what I've seen in most of the children I've interacted with, a lot of them want to be inspired. A lot of them want to know that we care about them. I still want to stay in entrepreneurship. And the reason why is because I think a lot of people that are trying to enter the space or are in the space, I think they can learn from you. To an entrepreneur starting out, what are 3 things you would tell them they need to do?
Number 1, be intentional. As we mentioned before, there are some very scary days because even if the clients don't come or the schools don't call, bills do. And it becomes a very quick test of your persistence, perseverance, and I definitely think your intention. It's noble to do the work if our parts of the work with the kids are something that you are intentional about wanting to make change. But just saying that, hey, I'm going to work in these schools and you're cussing and fussing the whole way there, it's going to be a whole lot of stress in your life, because every time you have to do that, the love part has to be there. it's a balance, because once it becomes a labor and you no longer have your sick days, you no longer have vacation time, you don't eat. Literally, you don't work, you literally don't eat. There is no like HR. I think too, definitely get your business mentors in place. And I say mentors because I'm so fortunate to have people like you who have been more of a larger influence in several different areas. But I have a frat brother who's my accountability partner, because we've had that relationship since, of course, I pledged. But I think that's important because even again, so we'll run through our things because we share the connection in education. But then he's another buffer to say, okay, well, Victor, I love the fact that you're doing all these things, but when we look at partnering with schools, we have to look at this business plan, like, because we want you to be sustainable. We don't want it to be in a place where coding with culture can't exist, just as much as those conversations about developing the robotics and making sure that the culturally sustainable and relevant connections are there. You have to have somebody that's outside of that realm that's looking at it pragmatically. Like, that's beautiful. And yes, play all the violins, but we need you to be pulling in this. And so every month I have a call with him, and it's like, I'm cussing and fussing, getting on the call because I know what's coming. He's like, okay, listen, you need to be doing this. Does this make sense to be here this many days? I feel like those mentors are invaluable. And 3, don't be scared to fly the plane while building it. A lot of us, I think, wait for that perfect thing. I know that was my downfall, and I won't even go as far as to say imposter syndrome. I think that's definitely more the extreme. I think sometimes it's easy for people to be in a confused space because they're like, well, it's not that bad. Like, I don't think I don't belong, but I'm waiting for that perfect piece. I'm waiting for the pearl. And that was my thing with coding with culture, was like, I'm doing the work because as clients are calling and I'm doing this virtual meeting or going here, going there, set a price point. And then that price point goes into that document that every time somebody calls, this gets sent out, and this is now this. But you can't be afraid to do that, because right now, if I were still, I'm thinking it's so interesting. The way I always kind of put it into perspective for those that have asked me is, I still wouldn't have started. One thing that I think that entrepreneurs now have, so I'll give like the little asterisk, is you have it all the expensive things, the branding, the websites, like it's all there. All the things that I think took the equity out of business owning have now been given to you. So it's just like, you really cannot be afraid to get on Canva, build that site, post it.
Yeah. I started that way too. You've seen me grow over time, and my tech tools and my tech savvy, AI especially. I think what I've gotten from this conversation, and I hope other people do as well, even if you're not an edupreneur, just an entrepreneur, don't be afraid to fly the plane while you're building it. And don't quit your job if the plane isn't built yet. Don't quit your job. A lot of people want to quit their job. They want to stop doing what they're doing. In my opinion, you have to earn the right.
I think a lot of people, especially when we talk about the realm of education, people are feeling disgruntled in ways, as you said earlier. Not only kids, but adults are hurt and dealing with so much trauma in so many ways. So a lot of times our first response to that, I got to get out of this classroom, it's so terrible, and and the kids are horrible, and the parents don't care, nobody's signing on. And what became evident very early on to me is that even not totally jumping out, I'm gonna go work for a curriculum company, and I'm gonna sit at home, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, Victor Hicks, every morning waking up, number one, I would be so unproductive in that space because there's not that constant movement. I'm definitely the person that in that school environment, that's part of what keeps me, as chaotic as that sounds. And it is that the interaction with kids and realizing there's a sense of urgency to the work. And not saying that people that work from home, there's not that sense, but it goes back to our conversation, right, about intentionality. Why are you leaving this space? Once I asked that very simple question to myself, it was like leaving my job was cutting off my nose to spite my face. Because so much of what coding with culture, what made the magic, why people wanted to hear what I even had to say, was because I was teaching. It wasn't because I had written curriculum, because again, life hack was what Victor Hicks was doing in the classroom. So wanting to be an entrepreneur, I had to get out of that of like, oh my God, I'm leaving and I don't want anybody telling me what to do. Well, I didn't, but how do I want to do that? Why do I want to do that? How fulfilled are you going to be in that work if there's not intention or reason behind it?
Not you, but there's been some people that when I speak to them, they seem very impatient and very unhappy with their current situation. And as I sit back and watch them, I keep seeing that they get opportunity after opportunity. And I'm like looking at them, and and thinking to myself, you're complaining all the time, but you're getting the opportunities. They're just not coming the way you would like them to come.
Or
But
the
here's
ones
the
that you want
thing,
to, or the ones that you want to come, the heavy hitters. But I think that's where the what's for you is for you.
and it builds you up for those bigger things. This summer, I'm keynoting 6 different places,
Mhm.
entire conferences, and an entire school district. I've been wanting that for 5 years.
Mhm.
Every now and then I would get a keynote, but now it's becoming more and more. It's taken years for the audience to see me in that way. And now for a word from one of our sponsors. Are technology issues slowing you down at your school? If that's the case, look no further than 5-Star Technology's Virtual Help Desk. Their team of experts are available to support you remotely, resolving up to 40% of common issues like password resets, device connectivity, and lots more. With just a few clicks, you'll have access to their live chat from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. Just enter your email to get started. Then you'll live chat with one of 5-Star's EdTech experts to diagnose your problem. And if their virtual help desk agent can't solve the issue completely, they will dispatch the ticket to your school's on-site tech team. Let 5-Star Technology Solutions be your support partner. Experience their virtual help desk, which is affordable, efficient, and always there for you. Please contact them at 5startech.com/contact us. Once again, 5startech.com/contact us. And for your convenience, you'll find this link in the episode's show notes. I want to transition now into STEM and computer science. In my opinion, in education, we should be also preparing kids for working careers.
Yes.
In my opinion, some people don't believe that, but being a computer science major, how can I not feel that way? It's not the only thing, but I think it's an important thing. What is your why for STEM and computer science?
I think it goes back to really just the equity piece. If we really look at it in the right way, right past the the digital divide, and really looking at the world that is coming, or I wouldn't even say it's coming, the world that's here and is rapidly continuing to show itself, and how kids will have to be prepared to operate in that space. And so for me, the reason about number one, providing very clear pathways to getting there, supportive pathways. I think that's another thing. It can't just be, okay, we're going to toss a coding activity to these kids and all of a sudden it's going to address diversity. I think we have to start using that vocabulary. It's the computational thinking, computer science. Again, not to take away from that, but that's just a small piece. It's very easy for the child that does not want to code to dismiss computer science and STEM and the many different entry points into that lucrative workforce. But you have to be able to problem solve with this type of skill set. You have to be able to think in this kind of type of ways. We can still cultivate the creativity, but you have to connect the dots for kids. And one time when I reached out to you was these tutorials aren't it. My kids are they love computer science, but a lot of it is they love it because of their connection to me. So a lot of that, which again is important, that but what I was seeing is that my kids were matriculating through the process. By the time they got to middle school, when it went to actual coding in Python, and nobody was staying in the CTEM pathway. So it was like, okay, we were igniting the flame, but what we really weren't connecting them anymore. Elementary teacher has all the cool robots and they're doing Angry Birds, but kids that once they realized they didn't want to code, we still were losing the girls. We still were losing the Black kids. We still were losing a lot of the brown kids because they love that. But once that's not coding, but also that's not the majority. And I think now look how fast machine learning and AI has grown.
Now coding's not a problem anymore.
Listen, any of that, I definitely think we expose them to coding. I think coding is a very accessible way to get the juices
Computational thinking, right?
But what we really want to do is inspire that type of problem solving.
Our brother, Ken Shelton, I heard him on a podcast. I think it was last year around ISTE time, and I forgot the podcast. I don't want to quote him exactly, but he made a statement around coding is becoming an obsolete skill. And he explained that there are machines now that can provide the code. You just have to input what you want done and in the language you want. And I did look it up, and he was right. But now with artificial intelligence, now it's accessible for everyone. I really think we need to focus on teaching kids how to solve problems. Solving problems in computer science One way is computational thinking, is to solve a computational problem. In STEM, is the design process. And there's computer science that can be done within the design process. I think if you're a STEM teacher, you're a design teacher. It depends on what the problem is, where the science and technology and math that you will use, but the methodology
is the
always
same.
the same.
I think of computational thinking, design thinking in the same way. We want kids to be able to approach this same skill from so many different areas and so many different venues, because that's really how you ignite the flame that's going to close the digital divide.
I want to get into HBCUs. And for the audience, HBCUs are historically Black colleges and universities, and they are a big theme in Victor's work. Victor, please explain to the audience the importance of HBCUs and why you're so passionate about them.
I think they're just, number one, undoubtedly a big part of who I am, as not only as a teacher, but as the man I am today. My professors were huge parts of being the teacher and why I'm the type of teacher I am today, and making sure that as we were learning pedagogy and all the things that you learn in pre-service teachers, being intentional about that, instilling that culturally relevant and sustainable piece before it was even in vogue, because this is late 90s, early 2000s, when those words weren't things yet. But I think it was important because I was always able to do the work before the work was a thing. It was nice to be able to step into the forefront and lead some of that work because I had already been doing it before it had a title or a name to it. That definitely was tied to my HBCU experience. But I think a lot of and it was not common, it's not even the word, but just realizing that when you show up in a space, that you have to show up so prepared, and you need to show up tenaciously. You need to show up all of these things, because the world is not a fair place. But also, we're not going to wallow in the sorrow of that. We're going to give you these tools to make sure that you're ready to go. And I think I saw in so many of my students that even before doing it, but with the name, with Coding with Culture, is like, okay, this kid needs to be connected to this process. How do I shape my pedagogy? And now let's go the next step. And I saw so many kids succeeding under that. There's no magic formula. It's just I teach how my HBCU teachers would have taught me at this point. And I think that's always one of the things, even as I sit down and I create my units, or I create it's like, okay, how would I have taught? What would I have said? What would I have wanted? Or not even wanted, but what would my professors have done? I remember having a professor who was actually the football coach at CAU, and we were in a intro to golf and volleyball class. And he goes, hey, you have to be intentional about teaching these Black girls about PE. And I'm like, okay. For him to realize that as 19, 20-year-old potential PE teachers, how do I connect my kids, who I know the type of learners they are so well? How do I connect them to this process also? So I think that it really was the impact. And so naturally, like when I did Coding with Culture, it was like, okay, I got to figure out how to incorporate the HBCU. So it wasn't like a lot of the curriculum or a lot of the lessons were like, okay, I'm doing this with the intention of. It was like, okay, well, we did the step team. They were stepping about HBCU. We did when I was coaching cheerleading. They knew about the history of even the HBCU genres of cheerleading. So such a big impact on my life. So I think for me, wanting to connect other young people to that, whatever their past may be.
One of the cool things that I've seen you do is the PBL unit where they design an HBCU. How did your students respond to that?
Oh my God, they love it. Now, you talk about something that gives me gray hair. I remember we did at Condesi, first school after leaving, going to the charter system, pre-Coding with Culture. And we did a Thanksgiving camp with the organization that came down. And that was all hands-on. So the kids, they had a series of sessions, but I wasn't even really privy to Minecraft for education or any of that yet. So it was like they designed a brand. They had to do a model. I think we built physical model campuses because they were with us all day. And then that transitioned into the Minecraft. So even when I look at that, I'm like, wow, I was so basic. The one thing I realized is the joy hasn't changed. And the kids, that is one of the units. And I love that it's so many people's favorite units, because I think that is when my kids, despite the technology tools, you really get to see the importance. But I think that, again, we talk about building that, your why and growing in the moment. Why I realized it was bigger than just computer science. Notice in any of that, now coding was a part of each of those. They, designed a website. The first time was in Google Sites, maybe not too much coding, but that year we did Scratch. So they had to design like a very basic campus tour. Computer science has always been a vehicle. The more comfortable I got with it as a teacher to be able to give them that skill, but they were always going through the design process. They were always modulating abstractions. What are the things that we need to do to make this project even doable? So I love that project. And I would say there is actually a core of coding with culture. That would be it.
Victor, I think this is going to be your legacy when it's all said and
I
done.
hope so. Let's speak that into existence. Listen, because I got bills to pay, George.
All right, Victor, I picked 3 things I love and respect about you. And for the audience, let's recap it. Entrepreneurship, you're passionate about STEM and computer science, and of course, HBCUs. But what do you want those watching and listening to know about you that hasn't been said here today?
I think one of the things I would say is most important is that I would want people to know that I stand for the revolution of education. I will definitely unapologetically say a lot of that is centered around children who look like me, because I think, unfortunately, we have seen too long of a disparity to be allowed to exist in those spaces where Black and brown children are. For me, the real passion behind Coach Hicks and the thing that connects the stepping and the computer science is really wanting people to look differently at how we speak or how we educate Black and brown children, and giving them the benefit of the doubt or not even just the respect of being able to make decisions. I don't understand. I've never understood the purpose behind a completely quiet learning environment, because they're kids. How many times are we absolutely 100% quiet? But we need them to be able to be in a space where they're not penalized for things. I think we look at kids, in theory, one of the most frustrating things is hearing the studies behind the kinesthetic, the theories behind moving or learning with music. And then in some of these schools, Black and brown children are penalized for some of those same behaviors. And again, being very intentional about educating in diverse spaces, that is the why behind Coach Hicks. That is the thing that I'm most passionate about. I think the reason a lot of it falls short because people are afraid to say what needs to be said. And I think the one thing I would want people to walk away from, and they don't follow me on Twitter, I'm so demure on there. I know they wouldn't think so. I think that's a part of it. As a Black male educator, I have to be willing to step into that space and be that middle ground to say, we need to learn this, but also let me be honest and respectful of you enough to say that this way is not it. And then challenge myself to step up to the plate.
This is the part of the show where I give you your flowers.
Thank you, sir.
Victor, I think you're a kind man.
Thank
you.
A
very kind man. I think you have a lot to offer the world. I think you are doing a lot of good in the world. And I think that anyone who comes in contact with you would feel the same way I do.
Mm-hmm.
I love you. I appreciate you. You have a strong knowledge base. You use your experiences and your setbacks to advocate for others, help others, and teach the youth of America. I am proud to know you. I know that everyone that does come in contact with you feels the same way. And I just want to say thank you.
Well, now I got to look. I got to face these children. My eyes will be all swollen, looking crazy. I will listen. I appreciate that. That will definitely be fuel to keep me going. Because that is exactly what I am out here trying to do. So thank you so much for seeing that, number one, but also definitely for sharing that, brother. That means more than you.
Let's put it in the universe. How can people contact you? Not just in Atlanta, not just in America, but all over the world, for Coach Hicks to come and work with the kids, to come and keynote, to come and do coaching. How can they contact you?
We are Coding with Culture at every platform. So codingwithculture.com. Facebook, all the socials, we are Coding with Culture. I am Victor Hicks on LinkedIn.
And that will be in the show notes. To all my folks out there listening, all my superintendents, all my directors, please hire Victor. That's it for today. Thank you so much. And
thanks for having me, guys.
This is the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Lifelong Learning Defined podcast with George Valenzuela.